All right, so what we want to do now is we want to try and figure out how it is that exercise is improving brain function. All right, and so what you can think is that you go and there's maybe something that's produced by your exercise, and that maybe it's something that's produced by the exercise that's going to get to our brain and it's going to have this really positive effect on our brain. You know, everybody kind of has this idea that we get these endorphins. So you get runner's high because you get endorphins. It's actually not endorphins. It's actually something else. It's actually something called endocannabinoids. So our body produces endocannabinoids. Cannabinoids. You guys are up to date on cannabinoids because cannabis is this thing that has this ability to bind to receptors in our brain, and those receptors in our brain make us feel this reward sensation. When we exercise, we produce inside, we produce our own cannabinoids, and those cannabinoids bind to those same receptors and produce that same feeling of exactly whatever it is you feel at that time when you feel those cannabinoids. All right, a lot of it is this relaxation, this euphoria, this period, and a little bit of snackiness, because when you've exercised a lot, you get this hunger. Same thing as you get the munchies if you've had too much exocannabinoids, we'll call them. All right, but so there are hormones that circulate that affect our brain function, and those hormones could be endocrine hormones. And an endocrine hormone is a hormone that's produced at an organ, goes through the blood to its target. So you've got the secreting cell, because a hormone is going to be made within a cell and it's going to be secreted or released from that cell. So an endocrine hormone is made and released from one cell, travels through the blood to a different cell where it's going to hit its target cell and it's going to have its effect. That's an endocrine hormone. A paracrine hormone is made and produced within a cell and released from that cell, but it acts on a target cell that's very close by. So it doesn't have to travel through the blood. Okay, so an endocrine hormone travels through the blood. A paracrine hormone travels in the tissue that it's in, but it doesn't get out into the blood. And it hits a second target cell within the same tissue. And an autocrine hormone is one that's produced and acts on the same cell. So it's produced by the cell and it acts on the same cell. So the cell is exciting itself. Think of it as a teenage boy. All right. So basically that is the core of what it's doing. So an autocrine hormone is produced and acts on itself. A paracrine hormone is produced by a cell, doesn't have to go through the blood, but it's going to work on a target cell that's not the same cell. And an endocrine hormone is produced by a cell, released into the blood, and targets these cells that are at a big distance. Your sex hormones are really this type of endocrine hormone. So in the gonads, you're going to produce testosterone or estrogen, and that's going to go into the blood. It's going to circulate throughout the blood, and it's going to have effects in your brain. It's going to have effects in your muscle. It's going to have effects everywhere. That's an endocrine hormone. All right. So then the question is, what happens to different types of growth factors and hormones when we exercise? And one of the ones that has been really studied is this hormone called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Okay, so BDNF is a neurotrophic. That means brain-like cell. Trophic means to grow. So it means that it's going to help grow brain cells. Okay, so it's important in the growth and differentiation of new neurons. We said that exercise increases new neurons, so maybe exercise increases the production of BDNF. And look what happens. So this structure here, this little S-shaped structure here, this structure like this, that is the hippocampus. The cortex of the brain is here, the hippocampus is down here. And this is how much BDNF the brain is producing. When it's blue, there's not much. When it's yellow, there's a good amount. And when it's red, that means there's a lot of it. Now look what happens with 7 nights of running. 7 nights of running, now we've gone from blue in the cortex to all yellow. So we've got a lot more BDNF in the cortex of the brain. What about this area that's important for learning and memory, our hippocampus? We're going from blue-yellow here to dark red throughout the entire hippocampus. So now what you can see is that exercise is turning on BDNF. So when we exercise, we run. In this case, rats running 7 nights in a row, they get more BDNF going in their brain, so now their brain can make new neurons. And this is a really cool one, because we've seen all this stuff about traumatic brain injury or concussion-related brain injury. So this is an animal model where they did a concussion force on the brain in animals, and then they measured the growth of axons. Those are the brain cells, those are the projections that brain cells put out to make connections with other brain cells. And then what they did is they allowed some animals to exercise. And they did either 3 days or 7 days of voluntary running. And then they actually measured how far they ran. And what you can see is when they were allowed to exercise, the axons or the brain cells, the neurons got longer. They're making these longer projections so that they can reach out more, they can regenerate more. And the length of those axons was directly related to the amount that they ran. If they ran 4,000 meters, their axons went up more than twofold. If they didn't run any at all, their axons stayed relatively short. And there's this nice relationship between how far they ran and how much longer their axons got. So you're not only inducing growth, you're also inducing regeneration. So it's great for after traumatic brain injury or in brain diseases. And so this is a study where they're looking at the brain. So this is a functional MRI. So that means that we're looking at how the brain is functioning in living humans. And these are living humans with Parkinson's disease. So this is when the individual is on medication. You can see that the brain activity, especially the deep brain portions here, if we look at the bottom of this figure, you can see the deep brain portions were getting good activity in these regions here. When they take them off their medications and Parkinson's disease becomes more and more prevalent, what happens? Brain activity in these important regions of the hippocampus inside are going down. If we have them exercise and we look after they've exercised, look what happens. It's as good, if not better, than on medication. You can see the same thing in the rest of the brain, but it's really in these deep areas, the hippocampal areas, where you're seeing this amazing ability for the brain to get activated again following exercise. So we're having this increase of activity, and you can actually decrease this symptomology of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's simply by doing endurance exercise, especially endurance exercise where you go a little bit faster than you would normally go. Okay, a little bit of high intensity endurance exercise. And that's going to cause induction of regeneration of some of the nerves as well as growth of new nerves. So exercise can induce the growth of brain cells. It increases the local or autocrine paracrine production of growth factors like brain-derived neurotrophic factor or BDNF, and that increases cell growth, proliferation, survival so that we can increase learning and memory. The other thing that exercise can do is something that's really cool. So we talked about when you do exercise training, whether it's high intensity or it's low intensity, high intensity you activate AMP kinase, low intensity you activate CAM kinase. They both come together and they increase this thing called PGC1 alpha. That's right here in this figure. And if we take our skeletal muscle and we have lots of PGC1 alpha activity, we make a protein called CAT. And what this CAT does is really, really cool. So when we eat high protein diets, we get a lot of amino acid breakdown. So we have a lot of spare amino acids. And some of the amino acids, when we break them down, one of them in particular becomes this thing called kyurenin. And kyurenin is interesting because it circulates in the body, and it's okay when it circulates in the body. The problem happens when it enters the brain. And kyurenin can cross into the brain, and when it gets into the brain, it becomes something called quinolytic acid. And when it's in the brain as quinolytic acid, it causes the brain cells where it has quinolytic acid, they die. So it's a neurotoxin. When we have lots of endurance exercise, we increase PGC1 alpha, we get lots of CAT, along with all of our mitochondria and all of our blood vessels and all of those things. And CAT, it takes kyurenin and it changes it into kyurenic acid. And kyurenic acid is now a charged molecule. and chirinic acid can't get into the brain. So because it can't get into the brain, it can't become quinolinic acid. And if it can't get into the brain and become quinolinic acid, we don't see neurotoxicity. So we get less neurotoxics when we exercise, and we get more of these growth factors that are good for brain health. So exercise does two things. It decreases neurotoxicity and increases the production of local growth factors that are good for the brain. And so you get this double-sided effect. Remember, it's like your bank account. The number of brain cells you have is dependent on how many you're creating or what your income is and how many you're killing by this neurotoxin. And so what we're doing with exercise is we're increasing your salary and we're decreasing your spending. Your bank account's getting really big. Same thing is happening here when we're talking about the brain. What we're talking about is you're getting more brain cells because you're increasing the production of brain cells and you're decreasing the destruction of brain cells. All right? So exercise is increasing growth factors like BDNF and it's decreasing chirenin by making it into chirinic acid by making more mitochondria using PGC1 alpha. So then the question has to be, exercise is good for you. How much exercise do you have to do? So this is a cool study. It took almost 19,000 women between 70 and 80 years of age. And what they found is that they had higher cognitive performance if you had higher levels of physical activity. And it was, all you had to do was walking at an easy pace for at least an hour and a half a week. The highest activity women had 40% higher cognitive function than the lowest activity women. That's a huge effect. They have 40% higher cognitive function. It's amazing, especially as you start getting older, you start forgetting things. The one thing that you have to remember is you have to remember to get out and exercise. So it doesn't take much exercise. An hour and a half a week. That's minuscule at an easy pace of walking. So all you have to do is increase it a little bit and you'll see a big effect. But more is better. So going that hour and a half is getting you maybe up in aerobic fitness to maybe up to the 4th level here. Going from 1 or 2 up to maybe 4, maybe 5. And that's having this effect where you're going up a little bit. But now if I move it up even more, now my learning and memory is going to be even better. So the one thing with aerobic fitness is I can continue to add aerobic fitness and that will continue to increase my neurocognitive function. My brain will work better. I will learn and remember better. I will become smarter just by doing more exercise. Here are all of the things we talked about. Feel free to take a look through this, figure out the things that you need to know going forward. But the core of what we're talking about is that endurance exercise increases the autocrine production of growth factors that improve the production of neurons. It decreases the amount of a neurotoxin that gets into your brain by changing it from chirenin to chirinic acid. And that means that you decrease neurotoxicity. You decrease the destruction of brain cells. And as little as 15 minutes can have a 40% increase in neurocognitive function. It's a huge effect. Take my advice, go out and exercise.